Achieving a gorgeous grin from home isn't a total mystery with Bite Clear aligners. Just don't be surprised if all of your sleuthing friends start asking, "What's your secret?" Begin by ordering your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95. Bite Clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces. Plus, they offer flexible financing, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system. If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served. Hi, I'm Detective Dave. I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood. So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished. From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Bever. She's a Black queer abstract artist and was one of the co-hosts of the Attack of the Queerwolf podcast. Welcome to the show, Nay.
Yeah.
Hi.
Thank you so much for doing this. We've been wanting to get you on for some time and, just schedules and stuff. So I'm so glad you're here.
I'm so glad too. It's really nice to see both of your faces and hear your voices.
It's like real. I always say this, but it's always funny, like actually talking to someone who you follow on Twitter forever and only interact with on the internet. And you're like, oh, you have a face, you have a voice.
Yeah. Or it's like, oh, maybe I do like you. You're so much better not on Twitter.
The worst is when they're not. When they're worse.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, totally. Uh-huh.
So how we always get things started is we like to know, what was your first introduction to horror?
I think that it was Halloween in my grandma's bedroom. Not sure what age, but definitely like a single digit age. On TNT, so an edited version, and with my finger on the return button, so I could like change the channel anytime I heard someone coming near me. And it was exhilarating and terrifying, and I felt like a badass because I knew I wasn't supposed to be doing it.
Oh, so you were watching it by yourself?
Oh yes, by myself. Oh yeah, I couldn't trust anybody to not tell on me. Definitely by myself. And of course, I thought God was also watching with me at the time. Maybe he was. I'm like, how'd you like it? What'd you think?
Give us your review.
Yeah. Anything I could sneak and watch, because I did like breaking rules, but I was also very scared of getting in trouble. So I tried to only do things that I could reasonably get away with.
So was horror not really allowed in your house? Is that?
Oh, absolutely not. Most things weren't. Most secular movies, anything violent, anything sexual, anything Black, because that was deemed as inherently violent and sexual. Yeah. So, I also had to sneak and watch like Fear Factor because I wasn't supposed to watch that either. So
really,
it's not even like, one day my mom saw someone eating something like raw and bloody, and she was like, it's a sin to eat blood like that. Sin is in the blood. Or something absurd, and I was like, "Damn, can't even."
I did not even know that eating blood was a sin. I mean, I guess that makes. Don't we eat Don't you drink the blood of Christ?
If you're gonna believe in something, it's good that you can just make up rules as you go along. Because
that's very true. What religion was it? Christian, some kind of Christian?
Yeah, they're Protestant Christians, like independent, fundamental, evangelical Baptists. So Terry might like be able to see the difference in denominations being like in Middle America, because they get really, really, serious about their slight.
Oh, they do.
Differences.
It's funny. I remember one of the offices that I worked at, my boss was Catholic, and a coworker was, I think, Baptist, but it was evangelical. And like the arguments they would get into over a literal or a figurative reading of the Bible and all that stuff that was like right outside of my fucking desk. And I'm sitting here, a little atheist me, going, what kind of hell am I sitting in at work? My boss would get into arguments with his subordinate about religion and the differences in the Bible. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
I can't. I was always so jealous of Catholics because I thought it was so cool that they got to pray to a woman. Because when we were only allowed to pray to Jesus specifically, not even, God the Father, the Holy Spirit, nothing like Jesus. And I was like, oh, you get to pray to Mary? That's so interesting. It felt like, so, I mean, clearly I was just like very gay.
I just want to pray to a woman, please.
Yeah, I just want to pray and worship a woman. That's just like,
Why wouldn't you? Anyway, yeah, I grew up Catholic in a very Catholic area, so I am very much like, I only know Catholicism, which is its own brand of garbage, but
So I know that like you had to like hide what you were doing, but did you have horror favorites growing up?
Oh, yeah. I definitely, for some reason, Halloween was just so accessible, on television as a kid, that I didn't even have to have like a free weekend of Stars or like some other random thing come through for me to catch it. And then eventually I looked old enough to rent things before I was 18, because I was just a very tall kid. And so it was easy to hide it because I had a lot of alone time, like in a single mom home. Like I had a lot of alone time, and I looked old enough to rent the movies I wanted to rent, and sometimes even like go to the theater if they like weren't checking IDs, like a little small town theater.
Right.
So yeah, Halloween stayed a favorite for a long time. And of course it's like, it has to just be a forever favorite, really, because how do you not? But I was of course really obsessed with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, still am. And
so good.
Oh, yes. So good. So still so scary and unnerving.
It's like disgusting.
Truly disgusting. I don't think I realized as a kid that like so much of what was grossing me out was like the set.
Yeah.
Like it makes you feel itchy and dirt. Yeah. Like it's just itchy. The whole thing is just itchy.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's like one of those movies that you can smell. You can smell it coming out of the screen.
Yes.
I was just about to say that, Terry. You can totally smell it for sure. Because my godparents had a pig farm.
Oh,
and to me, pig farms smell worse than like any other kind of farm. I'm like, I could drive by 10,000 cows and be like, not too bad. You one swine. You're like, holy shit! Like, what is that? So yeah, the piles of chicken bones and just like how cavernous, one and the sequel is like, yeah, gross.
And I know exactly what you're talking about driving through, because like I mean we would do a lot of cross country, like not cross country, but we'd go visit my grandma because we lived in Nebraska, and we would drive up to like either South Dakota where they lived or Iowa where they lived, and you would pass so many farms, and like, yes, the cows smell terrible, but then you cross one pig farm and it's like, what is dying?
Yeah. It's such a distinct smell. And it's funny, my godparents, when we would complain about the smell, they would be like, smells like money, which is also like,
my parents would say disgusting. Something similar.
So, okay, here's a question. Would they slaughter the pigs on the farm too?
No, actually, they did not slaughter on their farm. They sent it out to a slaughter. Okay. So
it wasn't that gross. Well, it's gross, but
yeah, there's like pig shit everywhere and like dead baby pigs, but like, Yeah, not the slaughter aspect, right?
Just dead baby pigs everywhere.
Right. Which, oh God. Yeah.
That's a horrific image right there.
But it felt so good to watch something of like a rural kind of farm-like area it was like you were supposed to be scared of it, and it was supposed to be evil, and it was supposed to be gross. And it was like really validating to see something portrayed that way, because it's like, if I had those feelings about environments that I was in, it was like, stop it, you're being silly. No, this isn't scary. No, this isn't gross, And so it was kind of like really thriving off of that vibe. Like, yes, like absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what draws you to horror now as an adult?
I mean, I still think it's the same thing, really underlying. I think it's what draws me to all of my favorite things, where it's like, well, I mean, I think inherently it's something I enjoy. Like maybe I would have enjoyed it regardless of if it'd been kept away from me or not. But I mean, maybe it's petty or immature. I really don't care. But there's certain things that I find myself doing as an adult, whether they're like really hedonistic or blasphemous or like something R-rated or wrong or watching, whatever that is. I just find it so thrilling that, one, I get to do it like kind of whenever I want. That two, I'm not going to hell for any of it. And that it's also something that I really enjoy. And I'm like, how dare you try to keep this from me? Like, how dare you? I mean, I think of that when I'm watching horror. I think of that during sex, or like anything that's just like amazing. And you're like, how dare you? Like, no wonder you wanted to keep me from this, because you knew that if I could experience this or ask questions in this way, that everything you've taught me would unravel. And I would have to also question that. And I think it's still just like really perks me up to do bad things or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I love that.
I don't know. It's I wish it was like something else. Maybe no, I don't want to wish. I don't want to have like shame around that or feel like I am just my 8-year-old self is feeling like a bad girl, because maybe that's super cool too. I don't know.
So do you still get that kind of childhood fear and fascination watching horror movies?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, obviously I can access whatever I want to. I mean, for the most part now. And so I guess there's not the kind of thrill that comes from possibly getting caught, or like what comes when you have to like defend your choices. That's not so much there. Not that people don't shit on horror all the time and you have to defend your choices, because of course, but I guess I still always understand that this is something I get to do of my own choosing. And I think that comes up every single time I watch something or listen to something that I know that I would have had to work really hard to have access to as a kid. And so I think that I'm still fascinated by seeing like beautifully orchestrated violence or something in a horror film. And I'm still struck by the fact that we get to create things like this, and that we get to like enjoy it or be scared of it, or like create things just to get scared from it, and or like create things just to do something as disgusting or as unnerving and like chilling as possible, that we get to like decide to do that, and that we get to like it and not have to explain it. And I obviously could not have articulated that as a kid, but
no, of course not.
I can feel inside of myself that I'm like soothing something that I wouldn't have even known I needed to soothe as a young person. And so I do think that there's a lot of things the same. I don't feel as like scared of the same kind of things in movies that scared me as a kid. Like demonic things don't scare me now as an adult, but as a kid who believed in a lot of those things, wow, that was like really scary,
Did you see The Exorcist when you were younger?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
I was gonna say that's like the pinnacle of like,
yes.
Even if you grew up religious, you're like, fuck, nope, this is gonna happen. It's real.
Yeah. Yeah. And I used to think that maybe that could happen to you just from watching the film.
Yes.
Like, oh, yeah, like I'm opening up this doorway to the occult and Satan and hell by just like viewing these things. And so, yeah, the things I'm scared by have changed, but also like as an adult, the things I find scary in movies are different because I've experienced like different kinds of relationships and different kind of like life stressors and have lost people and gained people. And, you know, and now it's like horror. I see all of the kind of background issues that can add so much fear and horror to a film because you're a grown up now and you have experienced even more horrors of your own and you can relate in a different way. Which
That's
is
such a good way of
amazing.
putting it. That's like such a good way of putting it, of like how you grow up and different things get so much scarier. And like, I don't know, it's just like a really cool way of putting it. Cause I never thought about it like that. Like in my head, it feels that way, but like, it's really, I've never articulated it before.
If I'd watched Hereditary when I was like 9, like what would I have found most scary? Like certainly certain things, but now it's like what I find most scary is like generational mental illness. As someone who is mentally ill from generations of mentally ill women, like I'm like, oh my God, this is terrifying.
That movie comes up so much with movies that like have scared us recently. I was going to ask like what other movies have scared you recently? It sounds like Hereditary, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of scared, I feel like there's movies that leave like kind of resonate with me in a fear that like reminds me of my own mortality or like my own kind of like interpersonal traumas that's scary. I don't find myself scared from movies like I watch Hostel and I can't sleep that night. Like that's not how I usually feel fear from movies. Definitely jump scares will get me in a pinch because I'm really a jumpy person and I love jump scares. I would never hate on jump scares. But yeah, what I find scary now is like movies that make you have to think about yourself in like, and the awful reality of being known and like aging and death and family. And so like, Hereditary, The Taking of Deborah Logan, I talk about that all the time because I thought like having to be caretaker for someone and not being the gay kid caretaker of your mom, like I was like, this is terrifying.
Oh my God. That movie is pretty sick on its own, but like that whole other layer of just absolute sadness is.
Yeah, totally. God, now my mind's blanking. For
that always happens. Like, hey,
scare me, but
what movies have you watched? Nothing.
I'm like, literally, I've never watched.
Never seen a single movie in my life.
I've never watched a single movie in my entire life.
I'm a fraud. I write about movies, but I've never seen a single one.
It always happens when people are like, can you recommend me a horror movie? I'm like, I've never watched a horror movie. They're like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, nope, I don't know. I got nothing. Nothing's left.
You know, an older movie that I watched that scared me, Let's Scare Jessica to Death.
I have never seen a movie.
I need to see that. I have not seen it.
I mean, I think that certainly like I didn't expect it to scare me, just kind of like reading about it and watching it. But any movie where someone isn't believed and it's, literally in my chest right now, I feel the like sadness and fear that comes from you knowing something is true and not being able to like have anyone validate that for you.
I've been meaning to watch that. It's been on my list for a while and I just haven't gotten to it yet. But like, I know that it's like not what people like. It's not what you think it might be in the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, it's also hilarious. Like, I think it's just a fun watch. Like, you'll experience a few different emotions.
So I know that Attack the Queer Oaf is probably over, but I have to tell you that as a gay person living in the center of the country, it meant so much to me. And I'm just curious. Well, it did. Because like, especially like on my long commute in the morning. I mean, I don't have that right now, but like in my long commute in the morning, it would be the thing that like, it was my little queer hour. I could like listen to people that I don't get to see very often, like my kind that are like talking about horror movies. And it made me feel seen, I guess. So I'm curious how that all came together and how you got involved with it.
Yeah, well, first of all, I love that so much, Terry. I'm so glad that if anything that came from the show, it was helping queer and trans folks not feel alone. And it's kind of poetic that has been like the main result of the show, because how I got into it was I was working at the Trevor Project, which you are very familiar with.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the number one lesson I learned from working there in crisis services was that feeling alone and never being validated for how you feel is extremely dangerous. So I was working there, and Michael Kennedy, my co-host on Attack the Queer Wolf, his boyfriend was a volunteer at the Trevor Project, and I worked with the volunteers a lot. And to my knowledge, Michael and Mark had decided to do the show. I don't know a lot of the background behind that, of like how that came to be. But I know at some point someone said like, hey, there's 2 white guy hosts. Maybe there should be a host that is not that. Because like, enough.
Yeah.
And I think Brian was talking about it with the other volunteers, and another volunteer said, hey, I think Nay likes horror movies. And so I got linked to Michael that way. And Michael, Mark, and I met up to see if we had any chemistry. And so they could like vet me and whatnot, and we hit it off. And they were like, we have a few other people we're going to meet with before we make a decision, but this was amazing. We'll get back to you. And then they got back to me. So that was what happened. And I feel so honored to have been a part of any kind of isolated queer person's relief, because like I said, and like we all know, especially right now and how isolated many of us feel.
Yeah.
It's so dangerous for mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, whatever kind of health you're thinking of, to feel alone in what you're feeling. And the thing that we also know is that of course we feel alone in those things, but almost the moment we speak up, or not speak up to make it feel like it's someone's like fault that they're alone, but the moment that we find it safe to express who we are or express our feelings or be vulnerable, almost instantly there are people who can understand that. Yeah. And who are like, I felt that, or I can understand why you feel that way. Or people just straight up be like, no, actually being gay is not weird. That's totally normal. Or something along those lines. And that was a lot of work that I did at the Trevor Project, kind of normalizing people's feelings, validating their feelings. And I am really honored that any of that ever came from the show, in terms of being able to validate people's feelings or make them feel less alone, because I want to always be doing that if I can, because I want that all the time. I need that. And I think similar to when we were talking about Let's Scare Jessica to Death, and I mentioned the fear around like not being believed or validated, God, like it's even something that seeps into my dreams at night, where I'm like trying to convince someone of some kind of truth for me. And it's like I'm screaming and they can't hear me. And just way too many of us experience that. So that is like, it was an unexpected result of the show, but it's like my favorite result of the show. And we definitely got lots of messages similar to yours from people in rural areas, or just in families where they couldn't be themselves or tell their truth at all. And it was the same story of like them getting in their car and then getting to be with like 3 queer people. And that just means the world to me. That I wasn't even thinking about that as a possibility. And then that happened, and it's the best thing that I've done.
I mean, it's so important. It's to be able to like see yourself or hear yourself or have that kind of validation that there are other people out there. Because for the longest time, I thought I was the only weirdo little kid that had these weird feelings that liked horror, and I never saw anything of myself in culture. It was like not talked about. I mean, you come up in the 90s and it's like everything is, well, don't ask, don't tell. Or it was like, like that was supposed to be the kind of like olive branch, so it's like that was what I was seeing. And that's why, you push away so much of that, thinking, well, I want to be normal. I don't want to be like this other stuff that's like never talked about or that's pushed in the corner or whatever. So I think it's really important now. And I think it's awesome that we're seeing so many we're seeing so many queer podcasts pop up in the last few years. And I think,
Yeah.
I think that's amazing to see. And I'm so thankful that yours was one that did that for a lot of people.
Terry. I'm glad that for the connections it's brought me for sure, including you. So.
And then I also had a question.
Terry. That was very cute and very good. I'm just like, oh, just very wholesome and good.
Oh my God, how adorable! I can't.
It's like gosh, what is his name? The Maroon 5 singer, that gif that goes on where he's like sitting there in the voice chair and he's like pulling up the shirt. That's how I feel right now. But also you are a fantastic artist, and I have fallen in love following you on Instagram and especially your art account. How did you get into art, and can you talk a little bit about your style?
I suppose I've always been a creative person in terms of like seeking some kind of aesthetic in the things around me and changing things and moving things around. And creating things out of whatever was kind of lying around. I think it's just something I always enjoyed and something that I did that brought me some kind of relief from just being very emotional all the time and needing the combination of liking to do it and then it also like being beneficial for me. And it definitely wasn't therapeutic. And it's definitely not something I ever considered as a career, even through grad school. It was just something I did for fun, and which obviously is better than ever having anything as a career, just doing things for fun. Because
what does that even mean at this point? Like,
right. I'm like, monetizing anything is like, it kills all of the joy. No, just kidding. Not all of it, but
just like 75% of it.
Just like most of it. But it was something that kind of picked up for me while I was working for many years in crisis services. Not only something that I would bring, like if I had like IR, like in-person work to do with young people, it was always like a fun activity to include some kind of like creative aspect. But it was also something that picked up a lot in my personal life because I was troubled. I was really stressed out, experiencing a lot of secondary trauma. I was a lot younger than I am now, and I didn't have the knowledge of my own mental health needs, any of my needs really at all. And I was someone who still thought that there was some kind of prize to be won for working too hard. And there is not. No. Hard work does pay off. But in terms of like working too hard at a nonprofit that's just going to replace you if you die, that's what I mean. And I would do it all over again because I think that the actual work that gets done at those places, and if you are like in direct services or whatnot, is very important.
Yeah.
And I think like that's how they hook you to work hard, because it's like, well, duh, of course I care about homelessness, or of course I care about young queer kids feeling suicidal. But it's like those organizations are also going to be like, here's $15 an hour in the city of Los Angeles. And you're not going to have any money to do any self-care. And you're also going to be worried about your bills all the time. So that might stress you out on the side, but you are saving lives. And you're like, that's true though. I am. And so you kind of like, it's complicated. Like I said, I do it all over again, but in my effort to kind of deal with all of my own turmoil, and work turmoil, and then the world turmoil, I was making a lot of art. And people wanted to buy it. And I was like, well, that makes me feel like I'm scamming people, because why would you want to buy this?
Because it's beautiful, Nay.
And I'm not saying I feel like that anymore, but I was someone who was like, well, I'd never thought about like trying to make money off of this. But at some point when I was working, showing up to a job every day for years, I was like, well, what would I like to do with my life? Is that something I should ask? And I guess I wasn't someone who really imagined my life after college. And I don't know if that's because I didn't think I would be alive, or if like I had been told like, you're fat and ugly, no one will ever marry you. Like, what are you even looking forward to? I don't know what it was, but all of a sudden I found myself like, do we really just work all the time and then die? And of course, that is like most people's reality. We're talking about capitalism and like all of the other isms that are part of that. And coming from a single mom home, it's like, yeah, bitch, of course you just go to fucking work. Like, you need money. And I felt miserable, and I didn't feel like, I still didn't have enough money. And I felt like I was out of control. And there's something about it's kind of like doom scrolling, having so much access to traumatic information. It was hard for me to feel like these hard things were avoidable when it's like such concentrated content of the worst days of their lives or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, even though I feel bad that I can't do this work forever because it's killing me, what if I thought about myself? And I couldn't even say it with like full like gumption because it still felt silly and it still didn't feel like something important. But I was like, well, what if I just kind of faked it till I make it? Like, what if I just decide the thing, or I try to understand what makes me happy, and then I try to do those things? And I think it all kind of came together at once, where I had like started investing in myself for once, started being honest about how I felt for once, started like having a broader understanding of just like Los Angeles and all the creative possibilities that are around, which is funny because I guess that's why most people move to LA, but that was not like part of my decision-making for moving to LA. And found myself in a really privileged position where I had already started selling work, which I think is like half of the battle in terms of like, I mean, you should make art regardless. If you want to make art, you should make regardless of whether you want to sell it or people like it.
Right.
But there is something very validating about money because, you know, it's capitalism and we're like, well, without it, we die. So, wow, I feel great. Someone wants to give me money for this. And it just kind of all happened at once where when I feel insecure, I think about some like mediocre white guy who like may or may not be talented, but it wouldn't matter because he's just going to shoot his shot. And I try to really invoke that at times, just to be like, well, why not? Because I'm not even a religious person. Like, to me, I'm like, I'm just going to rot in the ground when this is over. So like, who really cares if I try something that doesn't work out, or if I try something and people don't like it and I have to feel rejection? Like, what if I just live? And okay, who's that cutie back there?
Sorry, that's my boyfriend, and then that's our kitten who has decided.
Hi, boyfriend. Hi, kitten.
Nay says hi.
Hi.
Sorry,
yeah,
the cat was yelling, and I was like, "Can you come get her?" But
cat's gonna cat, you know.
Cat is cat.
But
it wouldn't be a podcast episode without Misu popping up.
I love that. I wish my dog was here. But yeah, you know, it's not something I planned. It's just something I'm trying out. It's like really fun and great right now. I don't know what I'll be doing the rest of my life. It feels excellent to be creative and to try and like harness that energy. But I find that what is most fun right now is trying things that I might possibly be bad at, which is usually my worst nightmare. And then discovering like, oh, hey, that was really fun. Or being really bad at something, but learning something from it that's like actually more informative about what you might be good at or like what you might enjoy more. And I think that is just like the coolest thing. I don't think I felt that kind of freedom as a kid to like explore and question and mess up. And like, then I also, you know, you get to like comfort yourself after you do it in a way that's like, I'm an adult. So if my comfort is like smoking a blunt, well, then guess what? That's what I get to do. It's just kind of like the best. I don't know. It's just a wonderful place to be in. And I think that the last straw for me was like, well, I actually don't make enough money anyway. So like, why not go like make not enough money doing something slightly less awful or hard or traumatic? And I've found that, yes, it's actually easier to understand. Well, for me, understanding that my goal actually isn't to be rich. It's just to have my needs met and then hopefully be able to meet the needs of my loved ones and people beyond that who have needs. And having that as a goal versus like trying to be wealthy or something. It's like, I don't want that unless I'm going to give it all away. So I found that the combination of trying to be nicer to myself coupled with actually asking for help when I need it is like the most wonderful thing that I've ever decided to do.
That's awesome.
I can't believe that when you ask for help, I'm a privileged person. I feel like I have a lot of really great people supporting me and like supportive of me. And so I find that when I ask for help, usually someone just helps me and then I have help. And it blows my mind that is like how we get to be treated in some special circumstances. And it's just like so wonderful. So
that's awesome.
Nay, what movie are we talking about today?
I can't even remember at this point. No, I'm just kidding. Earlier, when you were giving me a rundown of the timeline, and you're like, "And then, Nay, I'm going to ask you what movie you picked." I'm just like, "Oh no, what movie did I pick?"
You're like, "Why am I here?" Like, I just forgot.
I can't remember anything. I picked The People Under the Stairs.
In every neighborhood, there is one house that adults whisper about and children cross the street to avoid. Now, Wes Craven, creator of A Nightmare on Elm Street, takes you inside.
Something's in there.
But we gotta get out of here, Leroy.
All sorts of rumors about what goes on in that house. The police never took it serious.
She's been feeding that thing in between the walls again.
I'm very, very tense about this.
There must be another way out. Can't get out. No one ever has.
What goes on in this house is a sin.
Your father's one sick mother, you know that? Actually, your mother's one sick mother, too.
But what goes on under the stairs is a nightmare.
It is time to clean house! Over there! Let's go!
Wes Craven's The People Under the Stairs.
Oh my gosh. So People Under the Stairs, just a quick summary for those unfamiliar.
From IMDb.
Two adults and a juvenile break into a house occupied by a brother and sister and their stolen children. They must fight for their lives. It sounds so basic when you say it like
I was looking for any synopsis, and I saw that on IMDb, and I was like, this is just, it distills it to its basic essence, but man, it does not tell half of the story. So I got to know, Nay, how old were you when you saw this movie? How did you see this movie, and what were your thoughts?
I don't remember the exact age, but I know that I was still in elementary school, but like an older, at like a 9 or a 10.
Yeah.
So like 5th or 6th grade, which at my little Christian school was still in elementary school. And I watched it. I remember it was at night, and I remember my brother actually coming in and out of the room at times and like kind of watching it with me and then leaving. But it scared the shit out of me. And then I completely forgot about it for like, I don't know how many years. But actually I'll explain that later. I think you're going to ask me questions more pertinent to that thought. But yeah, I was pretty young. It had been out though. I want to say it had been out like 4 or 5 years though. Cause was it 91?
Yeah. It came out in 91.
Yeah. I think, I guess I was 6 in 91. I definitely didn't see it at that young of age. It was a few years later. And I remember watching it on the television, but I can't remember if it was a TV channel or if maybe my brother had rented it. I don't know. Cause my brother's 10 years older than me. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not quite sure how I got my hands on it, but I remember it being really, really scary, not just for all of the different elements that we were going to talk about, but I couldn't articulate it at the time, but I knew, how do I explain this? I knew that there was something racist going on. And I felt like, and we know, like it was portraying like many different things. At the time, I knew that I wasn't supposed to watch things that critiqued racism. I knew I wasn't supposed to indulge in reading or watch anything or people that would portray racism 100% accurately and then us like form opinions about those people being bad. And I wasn't supposed to watch things that made racist people look bad. I knew that. And so I remember feeling really uneasy about that because I had my own questions. And I definitely thought as like a 9-year-old in the Midwest that, well, I guess we'll talk further about that. But I think my understanding of the movie was still one of like, burglary is wrong and stealing is wrong and drugs are wrong. And so I didn't have like ideas of like how poverty affects communities or like my family was definitely a fan of the Reagans. So I wasn't like, oh, you know, Reagan released crack into the hood. You know, I didn't know any of those things. So I just thought it was like a couple groups of bad people. Like you shouldn't have broken into the house. You shouldn't be stealing. You shouldn't be like locking people in the basement, you know? So I had a different idea of the movie then for sure. But yeah, then I'm sure I didn't think about it for a very long time because whenever it's relevant, I'll tell you about how I remembered it.
Yeah. The other thing, I guess, were there like specific scenes? Because I mean, you know, you're kind of talking about how like you're viewing it now and it's terrifying in a completely different way. Were there things in it because like I can watch, I never saw it as a kid, but watching it now, I could see like specific scenes that like would have probably traumatized me as a kid.
Yes.
Do you remember any of those?
Oh, most definitely. I think the abuse of she's not a daughter. She's like what's her name in the movie? I'm already forgetting. Alice. I couldn't deal with that. I think also what was so scary is like there were parts that I was watching with my brother and I think we both were familiar with like certain kinds of abuse and it felt enlightening, but also terrifying to see something on screen like that. And for the context that I could understand at that age, even then knowing that it was wrong was both scary and important for me. So I remember specifically like things about Alice being really, really, really scary to me. But also I was, you know, like I said earlier, I didn't like to get caught doing anything wrong. So I actually mostly towed the line. Like I would sneak and watch a movie, but you know, there were many things that I was not doing. And I never would have broken into someone's house. Now, obviously now I'm like, fool, absolutely do it. Like, fuck these people. But as a kid, you could not have convinced me to do something so bold. Yeah. No, I never. And so as a kid, I also was like sweating, like people getting caught and him being in trouble. I was like, oh my God, like imagine the kind of trouble I would get in. So I remember those two things being specifically so scary to me.
It kind of sounds like you might have saw yourself in Alice because like Alice's whole thing is like, speak no evil, hear no evil, say no evil. Yeah. It's basically be meek, try not to pull attention to yourself because otherwise I know what the results are because it's living down below us.
Absolutely. Totally. And I definitely embodied that for a large part of my life where I thought that the smaller I could be, the quieter I could be, the more invisible I could be, the gooder, I know it's not a word, but like being the goodest kid, everything's a word. Let me take that back. Being just as angelic as possible would make people leave me alone. Like, please just leave me alone. Yeah. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm towing the line. You're going to be as nice to me as you can be because I am perfect.
Yeah.
And I think I definitely can see that.
Yeah. I think things are a little bit better for a lot of queer people, but especially growing up in like the 80s and the 90s, like what you're saying to me about like the kind of be the smallest person, kind of be that wallflower, be the person that is like in the corner that's like maybe not bringing attention to yourself because you don't want people to find out that you might not be like them. Like that really like rings true for me because I remember I never saw this movie, but you know, when you're a kid of a certain age, you go through like the Hollywood Video or the Blockbuster or the Family Store, and you see all the VHS covers. And I remember seeing this cover, and I loved Wes Craven because Nightmare on Elm Street was the movie that kind of got me into what I consider like horror, because before that it was like, Universal Monsters and Abbott and Costello and all of that kind of stuff. And that was the first movie, that and Alien, that like really hammered home the idea of like horror.
Are you gay, Terry?
No.
Are you gay or something?
What are you talking about, me?
I just loved Abbott and Costello.
I love Abbott and Costello. Meet Frankenstein. Oh my god.
Alien was my favorite movie.
It's one of my favorite movies, and
I love you.
And one of these days, someone's going to come on the show, and I'll be able to explain why it's like the movie that got me into it.
Just want to hear it so bad, but you won't tell me, and I fucking love Alien.
I know, it's so good.
Sorry, side tangent. My dad showed that movie to me, and I was not aware of my queerness at the time, but I was like, wow, Ripley's really cool. And I don't think my dad knew. I don't think my dad like expected that reaction. He's like, it's a scary alien. I was like, I really love her. And then I was like, as I got older, I was like, okay, lots of things are coming back and making sense about why these movies are like, I love this movie, but like not for the reason that like my father was expecting. It was more like, I like the lady who is a badass. I like looking at her.
Yeah. But like,
anyway.
So I remember the cover art, and I specifically remember the reverse side. And I don't know if you guys have any memories of the reverse side of this, but there is a picture of the man in a gimp suit. And I remember seeing that as a young kid and going, I don't know what is going on there, because I did not know anything about, but I was like, but this seems like something I should not be watching, because it was speaking to me in a way that like young Terry was not prepared to explore or even identify. So like that was a movie that I remember seeing the back of the box, and over any other movie, it terrified me because of that one image. And so for the longest time, that movie was verboten for me. I never wanted to seek it out. Even when I was like old enough to rent movies on my own, never touched it because of the things that image was making me question.
Holy shit. Wow.
I was so deep in the closet at that point.
Oh my God. Isn't it so amazing when you like remember these validating stories?
Yeah.
About your little gay ass. You're like, oh.
Well, and it's so weird because like I actually had to go Google, because I was like, am I misremembering this? And so I Googled the image of it, and no, there's the dude on the back with the gimp suit. And I'm like, yep, that was the image right there. That was the image.
But like that moment in that movie, when that happened,
oh my God.
I was like, I don't know what the fuck is going on, but this is the best movie. Like I was like, absolutely, this is everything. Like it's horrifying, and like I love it's just going all the fuck out. He's just like in a leather gimp suit with a shotgun, like
his best life.
Man and woman in this movie, they really are leaning in to all of their desires.
Oh my.
Of their
that's
desires.
One way to put it.
But like only within their house. Like they're out representing Forum is pretty much like Reagan. Like I was getting like 1950s housewife from her with her hairstyle and like her dress and everything. And like it's like, because we're coming out of the 80s, and we're coming out of like, the Reagan era, and we're talking about like these people that are outwardly facing these normal people, but on the inside they're just as rotten as everyone else, if not more so. And it's so like that image right there of this sort of like 1950s nostalgia era, like man and woman, wife and husband, and then you find out like how terrible that actually ends up going, like incest and everything. But it's like the outwardly facing thing, and then the inside is just like it's saying a whole lot.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, especially because like, I mean, it might seem obvious to us now, but like, there's a line where she says about the cops, it's like we're getting treated like prisoners and the criminals are out on the street
running
and
free. Yeah.
And like they're the ones that are pushing Black people out of their neighborhoods and gentrifying it, and they're like, we're the good guys, but actually they're the psychotic, like, and the worst. And it's just like very fascinating to watch, like, hey guys, look, maybe white people are the worst.
Seriously, like the message of that, of like having this outward facing, seemingly like heteronormative, perfect, like able-bodied, kind, nice charming, gives the cops coffee kind of vibe of people, and wealthy, and you know, so many people are led to believe that like this is the ideal, this is what you should be, these are what good people are, this is kind of like the standard we should all be reaching for. This is like when we talk about respectability politics, like we're talking, we should try and be more like these people. And it's seen as this ideal, and it's coupled with all of the privilege that not only comes from being these things already, but then the privilege of like confusing everyone into thinking that that's what we all should be. And that's like what the right thing is. And these motherfuckers are the worst. Like they are garbage in every single way. And I think of this often when someone, you know, you're talking to them about like, hey, you know, I didn't really care for what your dad said to me at your house the other day. It was kind of racist or like sexist or something. And they're like, oh my God, he's so nice. He didn't mean that. Like, these are good people. And you're like, okay, maybe to you they are, but like, you're actually not a good person if you're racist. Like, it doesn't matter like how nice your hair is done. And if you bring the cops coffee, like you're not a good fucking person. Right. And I think that was part of, as a kid, when I talked about knowing that we weren't supposed to critique this, I think that was a huge part of that. Because especially if you grew up like in a certain religious kind of vibe where it's like you're supposed to grow up to be the mother and have the daddy and like have the perfect children, and you're in this home that you own, you're like, those people can't be bad, because then I would have to think about why I want those things or if those things are even right for me. And you're not supposed to do that.
Well, and I was thinking like this conversation about them bringing, you know, coffee and stuff to the cops. I was also thinking of very early in the movie, they use a racial slur. And then when the cops show up and they're like talking about the people they saw, there's like one was white, one was black. I think they were service people. Like, it's like this outwardly facing like, oh, they're just, you know, these two people that were doing service stuff, I think. Whereas like when they're away from people and they're like on their own with their comfortable friends, all of a sudden they can let the racial epithets go out, you know?
Right. Because slurs are like, for some reason, what people are convinced is like the most racist thing to do, or like the most homophobic thing. And it's like, actually, when that guy called me a dyke from the passing car, it maybe hit me right on a certain day and shook me up a little bit, but like I was safe in my car and I drove away. Actually, what's more harmful is the people that you think are really nice, but who are like passing legislation that is going to contribute to my death, or like, you know, stuff like that. And it's like, people, for the most part, know not to use slurs, and to only do it once they are like in their in-group with people that they know it's safe to do. But for some reason, people think that that's like the worst thing you can do. And so it's like the thing that they understand to avoid. But it's like, actually the thinking behind these words, or the reason why these words are used, you're still treating people this way. You're just like, you've learned a particular word not to say. And I can't believe
the bar
that
is
passes
so low, guys.
Like, so low.
It is just baffling, because like I have a very shitty family, and it's just like baffling when things come out of their mouths, and I'm just like, I don't understand why you speak like that. And it's just like, with like, but we're good Catholics. I'm like, that's just whatever. It's just frustrating.
You know, I think well, I don't know. I'm definitely, you know, always learning. But when I think about my own family, specifically my white family members, and it's like, sometimes I can get them on the same page with me on certain things and why those things are wrong. Like, I don't have to convince them much. Well, some of them, that like the N-word is wrong. But if I try to teach them why it's wrong to have people be drug tested before they receive food stamps, like, it's like impossible to explain to them why that's wrong. And it's like, when people don't have this larger understanding of white supremacy or like any kind of systemic oppression, it's like they're just poking holes, and like they can only learn what's wrong through example, and they can't have this like larger understanding underneath to where they can possibly infer like, oh, maybe that's like not the best thing to do. And it's really frustrating, because it's like, there's certain things that happen in this movie that like I could convince even some of the most conservative people that like that thing is wrong. But then there's all of these other things that you would never convince them of that it's wrong. And it's like, we're talking about the same systemic oppression right here. Like, this is all connected. It's just hard.
You see a lot in this movie. I mean, this movie tackles a lot of different themes. Like it's about gentrification. It's about racism. It's about capitalism. It's about the kind of rot in the center of these middle or upper class white Americans. Like this movie covers so much ground, and it kind of adds to the tone, because I feel the tone of this movie is a lot of whiplash, because there's a lot of comedy that it's very horrific, but then there's moments of complete and utter comedy. I'm thinking in particular about like the dog that like gets thrown through the trapdoor and goes like on this bizarre slide through the house and comes out of the cupboards. Like I'm like
dying, and I was like, I feel like I shouldn't laugh, but that sounds like
the dog's gonna end up at your job.
Like Prince is gonna show. I will say, I know that Prince was like a bad guy. I felt bad for Prince. I think because I work at an animal shelter, I'm like, he's just a product of his environment. Dumb things that like are not important in the movie, but it's just like another thing. It's like, it's just great to see how people are like, because when they're treated a certain way, they become a certain way, and like you can't always blame.
I mean, that there's a large part of that in the movie in general. Like when you look at these different projects that they own, and kind of like what erupts in those environments due to scarcity and poverty and like racist overlords, slumlords. And I think, like I said, when I was younger, I thought that wrong things were just wrong. Stealing is wrong. Breaking in somewhere is wrong. And I thought that people that use drugs are wrong. They chose to use I didn't understand so many different things. And I think that it's always an interesting and important conversation to have in terms of like nature versus nurture, and like people being the products of their environments, because you can't understand the historical context of public housing and like white people buying up a bunch of property and gentrification in general. You can't understand that and have any kind of knowledge of the death it brings to communities and still look at poverty the same way, and the people who experience that and what they have to do to try to survive that. And that's not to say that you still don't have to like understand that some people just do the wrong thing, and it's not necessarily a product of their environment, or it is, and it still has to be like dealt with and navigated. But it's an entirely different story when you actually believe white supremacy exists.
When it's like manufactured, because like it's definitely, I mean, you can really see like that's one thing I think the movie does. I mean, kind of subtly, but does well in like in a subtle way is present this like the situation where you have Fool or Poindexter, who's, you know, his family, his mom has cancer and she's dying, you know, like they can't pay their rent, so therefore they have to pay 3 times their amount of rent. Like the kind of horrible situation that they're sitting in, and you see like the kind of like urban rot of what they're living in that is caused by this white family that is living in, on an outward perspective, this really nice house. And then what I thought was really interesting is once you get past like the foyer and you get past like the kitchen and like the general living area where it's like staged, you see that they are just it's just as rotten as like the city that they're turning into rot. You know, it's like there's like broken things and it's dusty and it's like moldy and it's like disgusting, and it's the more you go into it, it's almost like Alice going down like into Wonderland, where it's like it just gets more and more insane as he starts to like peel back the layers of this very like frontwardly facing nice white couple.
Well, and I also think it's interesting. It's like almost it's Home Alone-y in the fact they have like all these traps, but their house is feel like rotting because it's their choice. Like they are the ones that like put the kids in the basement. They're the ones that have things like, and it's like they're purposely doing that versus what they are doing to other communities that like have no control. So it's very interesting to see like how they have turned their house into a house of horrors on purpose, and this giant beautiful house, or could have been beautiful house, versus the awful things that they're causing with like using their
it's no different.
It's no different, except they're doing it on purpose for them and have no idea what they're doing to other communities.
And then that moment when you see like in the middle of all of their rot, that room of money and gold,
just like casually on the floor, like he just walks in and steps on it. I'm like,
amongst the like moldy wood and like
dynamite,
rat feces, dynamite. Yeah, all of this pile of money doing absolutely nothing. Like, it's not even in a bank collecting interest. They're literally just hoarding it in their nasty house. It's just sitting there.
It is literally just sitting there to like rot. Like, dollar bills are just gonna like get moldy down there and everything. Like, they have no care. And it's interesting because like at first I was a little on a narrative basis, I was kind of annoyed that he got out of the house and then came back. But like, when I was like thinking back, especially after seeing the big piles of money there, because he just had like a few gold coins, and the man is like, oh well, you could, and this was 91, you could this will pay for your mom's surgery and let you live where you're living for another 9 years. Just the little amount that he got. And so you see that, and you see how much it matters to them, but how like careless and how like just like empty it is for this rich couple.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of the part that you're just like, that's so disgusting, because it's like people are dying while this money just sits there and people are hoarding that. And I mean, I think about that in my own life sometimes, if I'm like tripping over $50 and I'm like, I can't believe that my problem today is around $50. And there are people who that would literally never be an issue for. And just like the amount of perspective you get into understanding like barriers and the reality check that these rich folks do not have. That's definitely that moment I had when he finds that room of money doing nothing. It's like, it's such a slap in the face. And at the time when I was a kid, I was taught that, you work to eat. If you don't work, you don't deserve food. Money that people earn is because they deserve it. I think I thought that even till a couple years ago, that like, if I just wasn't working hard enough and I just wasn't like trying hard enough, and not realizing that if anyone amasses that amount of money, they have to exploit other people to do it. Like, that's just not something I understood. And now as the adult who's like, I think everyone should disperse their wealth, I'm like so insulted by the younger self of me who thought that that everyone was just getting what they deserved.
This was your first time watching it, right, Mary Beth?
Yes, it was my first time watching it. I actually knew like nothing about it.
What was your experience?
I loved it.
Yeah.
I was watching it and I was just like, I had my mouth open the whole time, just like, well, and I tweeted about this. It feels like this movie is not talked about enough. And I feel like it feels very important to like how like Wes Craven addresses these issues. And like, I know he's a white director writing about Black people and gentrification, but I think this movie is very good and it's not talked about very often. And I know it's very wild and like tonally kind of insane, but also like very important and like kind of poignant in what it's saying.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it's one of those movies that when people are like, horror isn't political, I'm like,
1991, bitch, is right there.
Have you seen this movie? And like, obviously that's like, there's so many other movies, but it's just like, there's so many things going on in this film. And sometimes it might get a little overshadowed by some of the really absolutely wacky acting that's in it in terms of just like over the top. But I loved it.
Yeah, I mean,
so good.
Its message
and
is still
scary. It
scary.
scared the shit out of me. Like, it scared me. I was like, this is deeply uncomfortable. And all I could think about was like when I lived in the suburbs, like what weird ass things were happening behind. Because like I would go over to people's houses for sleepovers and like, it wouldn't be that bad, obviously, but like you would see into their houses and like I had some weird neighbors. So it always, like in my head, it just always makes me think about like suburbia and what goes on behind closed doors and like the very like neat appearance of that nice little road of houses. And like, you don't know what's going on behind those closed doors. So
no. And it's like still a relevant story. Like it's like not dated
I was
at all.
Say like it's not, and it's like these issues have been a problem for a very long time. And like they talk about like I think Ving Rhames talks about the gentrification and like buying up all the buildings and getting rid of them and making liquor store
and everything. Yeah, like
and it's like it's again like hello everybody. Like these are not new issues.
That house is in LA in the West Adams neighborhood, which is a neighborhood near USC, slightly south of the 10. So technically it is South Central, but kind of on the 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 kind of the northest point of South Central, right below the 10. And that neighborhood has been in the process of gentrifying, I think, since like the 50s or something. Like it's really interesting. I lived there for only maybe a year earlier in my LA life. And as you can with most gentrified neighborhoods, you can see kind of the stark contrast between like a new condominium where people are paying, $3,000 a month for a 1-bedroom, and then like a house that's been divided into 4 apartments that's falling apart and is being rented also at an exorbitant rate, but to like people who've been in the neighborhood longer than the newer white folks that can pay a lot of money. And yeah, I think it's interesting that that's part of the history of the movie. It feels very, I think it just adds to the scariness of it because it's not something that we can just act like only happened in the film.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And like my boyfriend was asking about it. He's like, oh, is it supernatural? I'm like, no, it's just people being fucking terrible. And like, yeah, it's like taken to the extreme, but like these are just people being terrible human beings.
Yeah.
Like,
but then some people being amazing. I really love the like allyship notes in the movie.
I know, I do. And I love Fool. He's so good in this movie.
He's phenomenal. He's a phenomenal actor.
Like, how do children have that much talent? And I'm like, how'd you do that? That's just like, he just is I love him.
Yeah.
He's just so good.
It reminds me, so earlier, I think you asked like when I first watched it, but I mentioned I kind of forgot about it. I didn't think about it for a long time. Like I would say at least 10 years. And in college, I don't know about you, I have a lot of reoccurring dreams. Well, I have a recurring dream that happens a lot. And that usually the themes in my dreams are like escaping, whether it's like a murder or zombies, but always like fortifying things and creating booby traps and it being like kind of cavernous and like, tricky. And I thought for years that I was having a like Fraggle Rock / Home Alone nightmare. And then watched this movie in college and was like, are all of my nightmares based on this movie? And it ripped me the fuck out because I realized how impacted I had been because it was so scary to me thinking about trying to escape that house. And I'm sure I was also very much so thinking of Home Alone and Fraggle Rock and probably the second Texas Chainsaw Massacre of just being like very like, cavernous and scary and dark and weird, and trying to save yourself and like build booby traps and fortify things. But I realized so much longer after I had seen it that I had completely pushed it out of my memory because it was too traumatic, except that I was dreaming about it most nights.
Holy shit.
Wow. And still do.
That's so fucking wild.
Yeah. The scene where the basement stairs can just go flat and you slide back down them.
Yeah.
I have had several dreams that the stairway to hell does that.
Oh shit.
Like a psycho.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And I used to think like, wow, you little psychotic bitch. Like, how did you come up with that? And then I see the movie.
Wes Craven dug his fingers into your brain and just sat there forever and just like sat there and just kind of.
What an honor.
I was like, the booby traps are just like it's Home Alone. It's like almost like the Goonies. Like you almost want to be like, because I thought about the Goonies when they found the room full of money at the end too, and I was like, this could be so funny if it wasn't so sinister. And it's so interesting how the booby traps can be like that weird line of both slapstick comedy and horrific. And wow, I'm also terrified of big houses. And so this movie very much tapped into like the fear of like a never ending hallways and like,
that's right. I remember that about you.
And things that like, because I have reoccurring dreams and I have reoccurring dreams about being trapped in a giant house and can't find my way out.
Well,
still haven't found out why that's happening, but maybe one day. But
if you'd seen this movie, we would know because like that is a fear in this movie.
Yeah, but like that movie tapped into that fear a whole lot, especially when you see like the shots of Fool looking so small in the hallways and trying to open all the doors. God. And like I know, and he just opened the doors, and then like they come out of the crawl spaces, and they're a whole other part of the house, and I'm like, no, thank you. don't like it. So this movie just like really did also tap into that kind of like, holy shit, like I can't handle those kinds of spaces in a way that was like, I should be laughing, but it's not fun. It's not really that funny.
I don't think you can think it's fun. I don't think you can find even the camp of like mommy and daddy in this movie, the like kind of slapstick like reactions to like different things. I don't know if you find them that funny if you actually believe in racism. Like I feel like you just, for me, I'm like, I just cannot, because it's going to sour everything.
Yeah, exactly. Because you like, it's like campy and slapsticky, but then you're also like, but they're really awful. Like, it's not like there's anything redeemable about them. Like, you're like, they're just awful, and they're playing up the fact that they are just horrific. And so, I was like, because I'm watching it, I was like, this feels like it should be funny, but it just doesn't feel correct. Like, I didn't want to laugh ever. I was just like, this just feels even grosser, because it's like, haha, you thought this was supposed to be funny, but actually it's just going to make you feel worse. And I'm like, it worked.
You know, the thing that I really like, the thing I really like about Wes Craven is how he tells a story, because a lot of his stories have a fairy tale aspect to it, and the way that like he frames it. I mean, you could look at an Nightmare on Elm Street, because it's very like dreamlike, and it's a fable about this dark man that lives in your dreams. Or we're talking about like even New Nightmare, where it actually like pulls from Alice in Wonderland when with like the way that, you know, Heather Langenkamp goes down and into like the hole and ends up in like this fantasy world. And this movie, the way it opens up with the tarot reading, and like it's sort of like this kind of prophecy about Fool, and how, you know, you can't escape death. And then, well, how would you escape it? And he's like, I'm going to turn around and walk. And he's like, well, then you'll walk through the fire and it'll burn away all the boy and you'll become a man, is basically what it's talking about. But it also pulls from Jack and the Beanstalk. I mean, this is basically Jack and the Beanstalk, where it's like, you know, this kid, he ends up, instead of like finding like a magic seed that pulls up a beanstalk, he goes into this house that is commandeered by two ogres, two giants, two horrible people that it's like fee fi fo fum, you know, and that's what they are. And so like there's this aspect of that, as well as like this aspect of like Alice in Wonderland, because the more you start to go into this house, the more it like reality becomes like impossible to reconcile with the shit that is happening inside the depths of this house. So it's like, I always find it interesting how he like spins a story while being about very real, very horrific things.
Yeah.
I never thought about it like Jack and the Beanstalk.
Me
That's
either.
really interesting.
It's just something like, I was like watching this and I'm like, I was thinking about him in fairy tales, because like I'm like obsessed with how Wes tells a story, when the ones that he's written. And like I was like, this just feels like another fairy tale that he would tell, that is like grounded in reality, because that's kind of what, you know, fairy tales are. It takes this fantastical approach to something to tell real world fears and real world issues that are happening.
Did he write this one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. I just keep thinking about Alice.
It's just so good.
It is so good.
Alice.
I keep thinking about Alice and the people under the stairs, and how I definitely didn't think anything about this as a child, but now seeing and understanding the importance of allyship, and how the allyship in this movie with Fool comes from very disenfranchised, like, white folks. And I something that I deal with my family a lot when trying to explain white privilege is that it is very hard to convince a poor white person that they have white privilege. It is just like, they're like, I don't understand. I don't have any money. How are you saying that I have privilege? And obviously, historically, a lot of work has been done to convince poor white people that they don't have as much in common with people of color and other minorities. But it's like still such a hard road. And I love how in this movie, it's like Alice and her brethren and sisters and everyone else under the stairs, like, ew, I hate that I gendered that. Just going to say that all of the people under the stairs, they didn't have a lot to offer, but they had something to offer, and they did that. And the thing is, it brings everybody up. Like, fighting for people with less than you also benefits you, especially the less that you have. And it's always hard for me to wrap my mind around, like, when poor conservative white folks don't believe in welfare or like unemployment benefits or like whatever the thing is they're thinking about this week. And I'm like, you need that. why don't you believe in that? I don't understand.
Well, it's like not, they think it's a race issue, and it's like, no, welfare, like it's a race issue, but also like you also benefit from welfare if you take it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
They make these things.
Also, read anything ever and understand that way more white people receive government benefits and subsidies than anyone else. Like, it's not like white folks are not already taking advantage of it. It's just packaged differently. And there's like less shame attached to it because that's the point.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thinking about like this idea of like allyship, you said something when we first started talking about your childhood, before we even start talking about this movie, where you were saying that, like, you know, there's this idea of keeping like this, the kind of the status quo, and that if you start to like pick at these words and start to like believe things, that like all of a sudden you'll see that the words that are being told to you aren't exactly true.
Yeah.
And it's like actually keeping you in like a place. And I thought of that, like, and I immediately like took a note down because I wanted to bring this up in this movie, because that's basically what happens to Alice and what happens to the people under the stairs, where it's like the two villainous people, the mom and the dad, or the man and the woman, they set these rules of like, don't talk about evil, don't recognize evil, don't see it, don't hear it. And it's by pulling at those strings that you start to see that like everyone ends up coming out of the basement. And it's like, no, you got to talk about things. You got to be able to recognize this as evil and say something and actually do action. And so like, when they're starting to crawl through the house, like I immediately it brought to mind immediately like Night of the Living Dead, because you have like the ghouls, you know, breaking into the house at the end, but you have people coming out, but it's actually a positive thing this time. And it's like an inverse of the evil outside breaking into the family house. Now it's like, no, we got to tear the structure apart because it's going to help us all. And it made me really emotional between them coming out and then the whole crowd of people that were at the front of the door, like demanding, you know, justice at this point. That I'm like, yes, this is kind of what needs to happen.
Yes.
It's such a potent metaphor.
Yes. It's like, this is exactly what needs to happen. It's like the folks outside the house fighting for this, they've been doing that. They've been doing that. And I was also thinking of that earlier when we talked about, you know, Wes Craven having written this, and, you know, he's a white dude telling Black people stories. And then we talked about people who say horror is like just now political. It's like, if you are ever telling Black people stories, it's political, period. Like it's never not. I mean, I wish people realized that all stories and like everything is political. It's just that they have privilege to not think about it. But like, Black folks, I mean, if you watch any kind of Black film ever, it's going to mention issues that you're like, oh, wow, it's 2020. And actually, that's still a problem. Black people, trans folks, queer people, like, we have been fighting for these things for a long time, but we need help from people inside the house. Like, we're outnumbered and we have been on purpose denied power and privilege. And I think you're right. It's a really powerful metaphor about standing up for what you know is right, even if you think it's not something immediately affecting you. But how we need allyship for sure. We need true allyship, which is work. You know, it's not just a title you're given for like being slightly anti-racist. You know? It
makes you uncomfortable too. It might make you uncomfortable because like it made Alice uncomfortable because like she is confronted with this truth, and she's like, you can't do that. You'll get in trouble. And you know, obviously the people in the basement, they have been, you know, they've had their tongues cut off or their ears cut off or whatever the case may be. They have seen that. And yet, so they have been forced into this area of like, I can't speak up. I can't do this because if I do it, then things are going to get worse for me. But it's obviously by the end of the movie, it's everyone coming together and saying, fuck you to the patriarchy. And then this establishment that has kept things shitty for everyone except for them.
Right. And like with Alice, it's like the moment she had to understand that the things happening to her were wrong, in addition to the things happening to literally everyone that mommy and daddy are like around, it reminds me of probably what happens for white folks who realize that they have participated in racism, whether they thought so or not, or cis people when like I've realized that I've done transphobic things and everything starts to unravel and you have to like think about all of these things you've been taught and how they're wrong, the things that you've done that were wrong, and like how you like bring justice to those things. Like, yeah, it's hard, of course, but it's necessary. Like we have to get over ourselves and our pride that we may hold around like thinking we're like so good to other people, and maybe often we are, but it's so important and so essential and necessary for us to also understand that we cause harm, and that we often just have the privilege of not having to think about certain things, and that it's going to be gutting when you realize that everything you've been taught or some of the things that you've been taught are wrong and that you have participated in that. Yeah.
Well, and I think back to even how the movie starts, where, you know, basically in the structure of the movie, Fool is our entry point to this world. So in a way, he's like the audience cipher. He is like us. We are following his perspective. So Fool is us. And the opening lines of the movie is basically, you're the fool. And he's like, I don't like being called that. And he's like, well, it's not because you're stupid. It's just that you're ignorant. And so it's like, it's almost as if like Wes Craven is like telling the audience, like, I'm not calling you stupid that you don't realize this is happening, but you are just ignorant. And I'm here. Let me take you on this journey of what is happening, and let me show you this. And some of it I think might be a little too subtle for like people that are deeply like, you know, closeted in that kind of regard. But like, that's kind of what the story is doing.
Yeah. I love the moment when Alice sees the dog attacking Fool, and you see her hesitation, and then she like goes and grabs the dog. And I'm like, yes, white woman, like this is how you ally. You took into account that it was dangerous and that you kind of didn't really want to have to do it, but you fucking did it anyway. And it worked. Yes. Like this is a moment. This is a lesson. And I know you don't like that Fool leaves and then comes back, but the fact that he goes back.
Well, I didn't initially, but
I was going to say, I loved it. I love it. I was like, look at him. He could have just fucking left and been like, fuck you, dude. Like, I'm not dealing with this. But he was like, I'm going to come back and save everybody. And like, not just Alice, but the people under the stairs too. I was like,
it's like Stacey Abrams and all the voter registration helpers in Georgia. Like, you know, Black people, we are not going to leave you behind. We don't do that. We know too much to do that.
Yeah.
And I know I got really emotional when he went back for her. Although part of me was like, you gonna have to leave that little white girl. Like, no, like you don't risk your life. I feel like there's often so many movies where like a crazy white person gets saved by a Black person. Like, I think obviously like that the Black savior or like reasonable Black best friend is often like sacrificed for, you know, other folks. But I think it's pretty spot on for just like a lot of different cases, because it's like fighting for what we fight for is going to impact other people. It's like when we try to not be ableist, like it doesn't only help disabled people, it literally helps accommodate all of us.
Yeah.
So yeah,
and I think that's kind of the message of this film. It's the kind of like, we have to be in this together. We have to lift things up, and we have to like break these bars that are holding everyone down, whether you are inside the house and being kept quiet or you're outside the house.
Yeah.
We have to break it down.
Yeah. Oh, such a good movie.
God, this movie is so good. Is there anything else you want to talk about, or do we want to wrap up? This has been like, I was so excited to talk about this movie, so I'm very glad that we got a chance to chat about this.
For sure, me too.
Do we want to give this our rating out of 5?
Yeah.
Okay, Terry. How many leather gimp suits out of 5 do you give? We didn't even talk about that, but like it's like not even like worth talking about. It's like that's not even like that important in the grand scheme of things.
No, but I mean, it was for a little old Terry seeing this movie.
You're like, I have no idea what's going on except for that. But anyway, how many leather gimp suits out of 5 do you give this movie, Terry?
Oh man, I mean, 5. Like I don't know what else exactly to say about this movie that we haven't talked about over the last, bit. I think one thing that that did kind of another thing that I think Wes Craven did really well, and he does this a lot, is the insertion of, there's a brief moment. It's very brief, but it's when there's the television and it's a movie playing and it gets interrupted with the missiles flying over Baghdad.
Yes. Oh my! I was going to bring that up, but I totally forgot. Yes.
It kind of brings this whole thing home, and it's that moment combined with everything else that I think gives this 5 for me, because it's that little moment where it's saying, see, this house is America, and you can see like these missiles shooting off of what's happening outside of America that America thinks is so bad or so horrible, or what is going on outside, while all of this stuff is happening internal, because we are so focused on what's happening outside of us than we are fixing our own issues. And so it's this moment in this film that is just, it's almost like a throwaway line. Like it's so brief, and it's what's also being shown the people underneath the stairs and keeping them entertained, is this moment of like what is happening outside. Because if you're focused on what's happening outside, you're not focusing on fixing yourself or rising up and fixing the problems that are affecting your house.
Yeah.
And the house in this movie, the people under stairs, is us. We are living in the house of America. And that is kind of what this is saying. So like, I can't not give it 5, because even though I do think there are some tonal things, and I think there's some performances that are like incredibly over the top, and there's a little bit of iffy acting, I think the message in here and the stuff that we've talked about over the last however long it's been, it's a 5 for me. What about you, Mary Beth?
I'm the same. 5 leather gimp suits out of 5. I was doing some self-torture last night and reading negative Letterboxd reviews about this movie because I couldn't understand why people wouldn't like this movie. And there were some people that I knew that didn't like it at all. And they were like, this doesn't make any sense. And I just like, it frustrates me, because I think this is I've only seen it yesterday, but like, it's like one of those movies that like has a very specific vision, and like Wes Craven just goes all the fuck in on it. And I love that kind of like, I don't care. I'm just going to go in, and like, it's going to be over the top, and it's going to be a little bit weird, but I also don't care. Like, it's a really important message and an important movie. So I think I just admired that about his direction for it. And I just think it's a movie that is not talked about nearly enough for how relevant it still is and how important I think it still is.
Well, I remember Jordan Peele actually bringing up a point that like it was this movie in some way that helped inform Get Out. And I know that it was announced earlier this month that like he is going to produce like a remake of it.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yes.
I wonder how that's going to be.
I know. I'm like, are you writing any of it? Are you like, I know. I'm super curious as well.
I know. Because I'm wondering if it's going to be as campy, or if he's going to go like full. I feel like he probably will go more serious, like full serious, but I hope so. Yeah. But Nay, I think I know the answer, but how many other gimp suits out of 5?
The final word.
The final word.
Oh, yes. Well, first I did want to mention something from what Terry was talking about with the bombs over Baghdad and us thinking things outside of where we are so much worse. And it's like, obviously we are very much so taught to think that everyone else is so barbaric and everyone else is so uncivilized. And meanwhile, we're doing like the most disgusting things right on our side of the fake line we created to call a border. And it's like, it also reminds me of how all of our liberation is tied to everyone else's liberation. Like it's something that I think a lot of oppressed people understand. I don't know if you've ever heard like someone say a slur that doesn't correlate to any of your identities, and you like tell the person like, hey, that's wrong. And they're like, why do you care? You're not X, Y, or Z. And you're like, because it's fucked up. Like, I don't have to be that to understand that. And it reminds me of that. So I definitely obviously have to give it 5 gimp suits. Speaking of the gimp suit, like that was the only thing, that and like him being called daddy in with the gimp suit, like that's so hot. I just need to just put that out there. I love that so much. 5 gimp suits. I think it's so good, still relevant, fucking scary as hell, and of course, I love over the top or camp. Like I love it. It endears things to me because, like we've all talked about before, I think so many of the things we do as queer folks, as Black people, like anybody that is an other, gets seen as over the top or campy because other people can't understand it, or they don't have the cultural reference for it, or they've been taught that like what other people do is weird or ugly, and it's like, this is just me. So I think that those parts of the movie are pretty endearing. 5 suits.
Also, just a side note, it's big. It's Twin Peaks couple, Big Ed and Nadine, because I'm a Twin Peaks person, and it was just very funny to see them in a very different dynamic. That's all. That's just very fascinating to me. But yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Nate, for joining us to talk about People Under the Stairs. Where can our listeners find you, and what do you have coming up you'd like to share?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Black Cupcake. It's BLAKK Cupcake. And I know I keep saying this, but I really do have some very cool things in development right now that I can't announce yet, because what if it doesn't work out and then I'm just embarrassed? So I'm always working on something, always scheming. And I'm really happy to have been here with both of you. This has been like a really nice 2 hours for me in a time that isn't always so nice. So thank you.
You also have your artist Instagram
yes,
account.
You can find my art stuff through my main account, but I do have an art Instagram under Gotti Los Angeles.
We'll put that in the show notes, everyone, so you can make sure to follow it.
Yeah.
So everyone, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with the People Under the Stairs? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I'm at MB McAndrews.
And I'm McGailey Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Steve Barnold for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Won't somebody please think of the children? Won't somebody please think of the children? Somebody please think of the children.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system. If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served. Hi, I'm Detective Dave. I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood. So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished. From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.